After experiencing the reading, which has multiple versions, the final being published in 1939, but his second version, 1936, considered definitive by many, I found it rich enough with so many underlying comments on art and film that it needs distilling into distinct parts of note. Each one a topic of conversation surrounding ethics, influence, and value of film and reproduction, as well as its audience. I encourage you to choose the point or points that stay with you, marinate on it, make brash decisions only to reconsider. This reading is poetic, and I think we should do that justice in considering it in a poetic way. Film and culture is itself poetic. Think beyond the title. Think about how you individually connect with it yourself, as an aspiring filmmaker, critic, or film buff. Walter Benjamin is consistently concerned with art in its traditional form, the purity of a piece of work, and how that relates to reproduced versions. He claims the phrase of cult value in artwork. To think of cult value, one must look to art such as that which is seen on the roof of a church, or hidden in the paint strokes of Renaissance artwork. Essentially, work that contains cult value often operates on divinity, almost virginity, this sacred experience between the observer and the work itself. When you view a painting in a gallery, you experience something through that art. It holds cult value in its perception. Though Walter doesn't lean any particular way, I gather that he is questioning whether film holds that same power. When Benjamin is talking about technologies, he's encircled by the introduction and takeover of film as a medium. What now is considered commonplace, if not out of date in some way, shape, or form, was revolutionary at his time of writing. So, much like scholars are debating the ethics of AI imagery now, those of the 30s, this published in 1936, were considering similar arguments for film. Benjamin discusses the aura of something being viewed, and how that can be destroyed upon reproduction, to which I believe could be the case in terms of fine art. It is a commonly held belief that the original of everything holds greater value, but I do not believe the aura to be entirely void upon recreation. Rather, it is shifted over and over again upon each reproduction. Each time it is filmed, remade, reviewed, the influence of a new person or group and the influences which have informed them change this aura. So perhaps Benjamin views reproduction as, say, a metaphorical vase being shattered, the meaning being destroyed. I propose that the vase was never placed in a kiln. The meaning is never permanent. It instead remained as clay and is adjusted and reshaped, dented, sometimes negatively, sometimes positively. Each time it is being viewed or interacted with, a piece of art changes. Benjamin eventually hints towards this in part 5. The uniqueness of the work of art is identical to its embeddedness in the context of tradition. Of course, this tradition itself is thoroughly alive and extremely changeable. An ancient statue of Venus, for instance, existed in a traditional context for the Greeks, who made it an object of worship. And that was different from the context in which it existed for medieval clerics, who viewed it as a sinister idol. But what was equally evident to both was its uniqueness, that is, its aura. It was mentioned in this week's lecture that the driving question to debate is, how does film change the character of art, not is film an art? And after reading Benjamin's work, I have a tentative answer to that. Film changed the character of art because it allows the audience to become the artist. As the reading states, it is inherent in the technology of film, as of sports, that everyone who witnesses these performances does so as a quasi-expert. To present this as a basic principle, allow me to read an extract from a short story out loud. Please feel free to close your eyes. Whenever I woke up, night or day, I'd shuffle through the bright marble foyer of my building and go up the block and around the corner where there was a bodega that never closed. I'd get 2 large coffees with cream and 6 sugars each, chug the first one in the elevator on the way back up to my apartment, then sip the second one slowly while I watched movies and ate animal crackers. Please open your eyes. All of our brains perceived that story differently. We see the foyer and bodega in differing ways. The narrator looks different to each of us. The entire series of events in our head unique. Many argue that film eliminates the free will of perception in an audience, allowing them to sit back passively, absorbing imagery without intention, enjoying a spectacle, the power in the director's hands. But how true is this? Ferdinand de Saussure, otherwise known as the father of semiotics, theorized that an audience can extract meanings from parts of a film. There are cultural signified meanings, for example, understanding the implied values of an individual in a Nazi uniform, and abstract signified meanings, for example, a dark scene making someone nervous due to an inherent fear of the dark. This theory, to me, is held differently amongst different individuals. We have different cultures, different fears, and thus the signified meanings of a film will be different and unique to each person. As Walter Benjamin states in Part 4, just as the entire mode of existence of human collectives changes over long historical periods, so too does their mode of perception. Then came film, and exploded this prison world with the dynamite of the split second, so that now we can set off calmly on journeys of adventure among its far-flung debris. With the close-up, space expands. With slow motion, movement is extended. And just as enlargement not merely clarifies what we see indistinctly in any case, but brings to light entirely new structures of matter, slow motion not only reveals familiar aspects of movements, but discloses quite unknown aspects within them. Aspects which do not appear as the retarding of natural movements, but have a curious, gliding, floating character of their own. Clearly, it is another nature which speaks to the camera as compared to the eye. We are familiar with the movement of picking up a cigarette lighter or a spoon, but know almost nothing of what really goes on between hand and metal, and still less how this varies with different moods. This is where the camera comes into play, with all its resources for swooping and rising, disrupting and isolating, stretching or compressing a sequence, enlarging or reducing an object. It is through the camera that we first discover the optical unconscious, just as we discover the instinctual unconscious through psychoanalysis. Walter Benjamin seems to idealize and enjoy the way that film can manifest a new perception of reality, one that emphasizes what cannot be understood by any other means, but there are distinctions within that. The film reality is not authentic, and so where does film lie in the world of art, and particularly in that time period when it's in its next to infancy? Benjamin differentiates the performance relative to the audience or the presence of technology, suggesting that the knowledge of reproduction within the actor, even, creates a natural barrier between audience and performance created by technology. A barrier that is not present on stage or when viewing something in its original form. He asks how one can preserve one's humanity in the face of the apparatus. To present this clearly, Benjamin provides an example. The film actor feels as if exiled not only from the stage but from his own person. With a vague unease, he senses an inexplicable void stemming from the fact that his body has lost its substance, that he has been volatilized, stripped of his reality, his life, his voice, the noises he makes when moving about, and has been turned into a mute image that flickers for a moment on the screen, then vanishes into silence. The little apparatus will play with the shadow before the audience, and he himself must be content to play before the apparatus. This all centers around the idea of asserting humanity in the face of technology. Does this define it as artwork? Should art be working with technology or in spite of it? It is implied within the reading that the actor performing for the camera rather than the audience loses his aura. But is this true? Or rather, does the aura come from the connection between audience and the wider world, rather than the connection between audience and the actor? When viewing art, who is now in control of perception? The audience or the creator? And can the audience mediate what they consume? It almost harkens to the idea presented by media theorist Marshall McLuhan, who stated that the medium is the message. Another poignant consideration came from this quote. Hence, the presentation of reality in film is incomparably the more significant for people of today, since it provides the equipment-free aspect of reality they are entitled to demand from a work of art, and does so precisely on the basis of the most intensive interpenetration of reality with equipment. How does this differ from the pure stance when it suggests that, in truth, the replication of an environment is more accurate and real, coming from something with more moving parts, more intricacies, more people involved, and the individual's biases, lack of equipment, etc., actually make the replication more flawed and less real? As someone who one day hopes to make films, Walter Benjamin's points encourage thoughts around the power of a camera and how it has influenced perception of our world. Is that at the hands of the technology? Well, Walter believes that, thanks to the camera, therefore, the individual perceptions of the psychotic and the dreamer can be appropriated by collective perception. But I believe that a good film will instead present moments as a true, humane series of events. The use of camera movements, editing techniques, mise-en-scène in all its forms is ultimately to connect an audience by showing the warped, biased reality of how humans perceive the world. Walter Benjamin goes on to share his belief that in even the most perfect reproduction, one thing is lacking: the here and now of the work of art. However, I would beg to argue in what capacity the work of art stops being here and now. Of course, when viewing a performance on stage, it is live, and in a film or reproduction, it is not. But there is still an anticipating present audience absorbing a piece of work in real time. Nowadays, live streams are real time, but not a collective experience, and streaming services take it all one step further with the ability to rewatch, speed up, and half consume film, and wider media if you consider YouTube under that bracket also. If you are taking Benjamin's analysis into the modern day, I find it interesting to pose the question: is the cinema experience more similar to consumption on streaming services or to watching live theatre in its relation to the perception of time? Underlying the reading is, of course, its historical and political contexts of war. The class system and ideas of political influence shape the ideas of Benjamin, as he shares: as soon as the criterion of authenticity ceases to be applied to artistic production, the whole social function of art is revolutionized. Instead of being founded on ritual, it is based on a different practice: politics. And this is the world in which we find ourselves now. We are receiving biased news, people with agendas are choosing content, and there is a constant, ever-looming incentive of monetary gain. New technologies and easy reproduction give the darker side of the art and media world more opportunities. This reading takes a Marxist angle, and I want to briefly explore that. Marx was analysing capitalism in a manner which defined his ideas as hypotheses rather than observed facts, as he was considering what capitalism could become rather than what it is. What could be expected, it emerged, was not only an increasingly harsh exploitation of the proletariat, the lower class, but ultimately the creation of conditions which would make it possible for capitalism to abolish itself. Benjamin mentions the superstructure and the base, making reference to cultural hegemony, a component of Marxist theory that was adapted by Gramsci to create the implication of the Marxist core. Essentially, it suggests that the bourgeoisie will be in control of the base, thus gaining control of the superstructure, causing the output of art to predominantly be through the upper class lens. Benjamin suggests that to find out how this structure operates and the pace by which it has been formed calls for theses defining the tendencies of the development of art under the present conditions of production. He also looks to politics and art's relation to such. In my opinion, our culture is proof enough that he was correct. Now we have the ability to look back on the hypothesis of cinema being used as an object for spreading hate, or as something controlled and dominated by the bourgeoisie, and see that it is obvious that this has remained largely true. He notes that in defining the developmental tendencies of art, you must be informed by political struggle, and their power to control creativity and value. This is closely linked to the democratization of media. Controlling output has become increasingly difficult, but when done so, it often acts as a form of manipulation in the interests of fascism. In my opinion, the digital revolution, long after the writing of this piece, has somewhat, though not wholly, made high-class control of output less extreme, and we are on the way towards a democratized world. The democratization of media is a model of reform that many believe would balance society through both state and community equal control. There are 4 key roles that media should perform in society if you abide by this model. The first is monitorial, which is giving key information to the masses so that they can monitor their state's actions. They're entitled to unbiased information. The second, facilitative, easing the communication within communities, allowing a back and forth conversation within it. The third is radical, allowing exposition and challenging of leaders and controllers' decision-making. And the final, collaborative, allowing the state and media outlets to be transparent in their communication with the masses. In the time of Benjamin's writing, there was much more in question surrounding the powers that be in the world of film and reproduction. But now we find ourselves all able to communicate. Though media is far from democratized, most people from almost all classes and backgrounds, ages and races have some level of media literacy that helps us sift through the confusing media landscape. But ultimately, the beliefs of whether film is replication, what art is pure, and who is in control is subjective. Almost all opinions can be backed up, even if they are entirely different. So where do you stand on Benjamin's work? And how much do you disagree with me? Let's find out.